Me against the trigger, me against myself, because my old self-gravity, my OSG, would want to respond this way, would want to fight, would want to retreat, would want to shrink, would want to close off, would want to punish. Women want to punish very often too. But I get to choose how I want to respond. I get to choose the truth. And then when I really act on that, and I create a little bit of a distance from the trigger first, and then I show up the way I want to, like I feel like $1 million. And guess what I did there? I proved it to myself with another win. Hey everyone, I am Rachel Scheer, and I am a certified functional medicine nutritionist here on the Ever Forward Radio today. On today's podcast, we dive into how to heal the gut, the power of our gut microbiome, the gap that is happening right now between the fitness world and functional medicine, and how we can become our own advocate for our healing, live in our authentic truth, and create the life that we are so worthy of.
3, 2, 1.
I had a feeling that you might not have, and I brought some sample bags.
You always have all the goodies. I've been doing that mud water.
Yeah. That's
the mushroom stuff, all of it.
All the stuff, all the mushroom stuff, anything functional, adaptogenic, I'm all about.
I love that you're into all the like biohacking, optimizing stuff. That's cool.
Yeah. I mean, there's fitness, there's nutrition, and then I feel like there's this little world where everything else lives that's just on the fringe, a little different training modality or a recovery technique, or technically it's food or a supplement, but it's just really unique functional medicine, adaptogens, mushrooms, functionality of things that, most people don't think of to use for health, for fitness, but also just, quality of life, aging resiliently, everything.
Yeah. For me, I've always been like incredibly fascinated just about like the human body and how it works and operates, and how we can make it operate more at like a peak optimal performance level, like literally since I was a kid. And I think I've just been like guided by all these different paths, whether it was like from fitness to dietetics to functional medicine to gut health, now in like healing, meditation, breath work. And it's always been somewhere aligned along that. So never ending.
It really is never ending. But your story is one that is so, for me, kind of like tried and true. Because, I got my start really in the fitness space, not like yourself. I was never a competitor, but when I thought of myself, what I did, and especially on social media, I'm fitness chase. And it's interesting. So many people that I know that have started there 5 years ago, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, I feel like we're all kind of migrating towards the same stuff now of, I'm not that fitness version. Taking care of my body is and probably always will be a very important aspect of my life, but there's so much more.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, and I think it's true in your story, you kind of have some damage done that you're now working on from the hardcore kind of fitness space.
Yeah. I have always had that like go drive, hyperachievement is just like part of me. Part of that just comes from my own trauma. I was actually very much like neglected as a kid. So like dance, gymnastics, athletics, fitness for me was always my outlet. And it was a way that I actually got a lot of attention from my parents, where otherwise I really didn't get any attention as a kid.
Is that what you mean by neglected? Were you the baby of 10 or something? Or
I was actually the middle kid, but very, very dysfunctional home. I'm so open to talk about it.
Sure.
But
it's your life.
Yeah, my mom would just be gone and I never knew where she would be at. My dad suffered from mental illness. He's actually currently homeless. So his mental health has continued to decline. Part of the reason why I'm also very passionate about functional medicine, finding a root cause based approach, because I really do believe mental health comes down to just like the way that we take care of ourselves, and trauma that's really been unaddressed in the body. And my mom also had her own trauma as well. So, when my parents actually separated at a young age, physically, they actually stayed together in the same home, but they were separate. And so super dysfunctional, just like view of what a relationship looked like, or a lack of relationship.
Yeah. And even more confusing for the children. It's like we're together, but we're not.
Yeah, incredibly confusing. And I would like wake up in the middle of the night and just like go into this like hyper panic mode of like, where is mom? Where is mom? She's gone, because I never knew where she would be at. So for me, I would get any sort of attention through achievement. When I was in gymnastics and I was achieving, when I made varsity dance team, when I got into a college like Baylor University, and my family actually came from a lot of poverty. Like we foreclosed on our home even as a kid. So for me, fitness gave me that attention at a very early age, but it also was a healthy outlet for me. I think for anybody who's really gotten into fitness, like, yes, we do it for like, we want to look good naked, we want to have the physique, but that's really just a byproduct of, just this therapy that we really, really get for us, like what it does for our mind. I know I can be having like a super shitty day, be really, really low, energy low, and then get in a workout and come out feeling like a completely different person. And that's why it's been such a crucial part of my life. And it's something that I've never given up. But for me, like I can almost push myself to the extreme to a fault at sometimes.
Yeah, I've been there.
Yeah. And I was never like the most talented when it came to athletics or sports. I was never the smartest when it even came to academics. I mean, to be completely honest, I had to bust my ass and study for like 5 hours after school just to make like decent enough grades to get into a college like Baylor. Even when it came to like drill team, and drill team is, by the way, dance team in Texas, but just to make varsity dance team, still to be, kind of mediocre at it, to be honest. But what that actually did for me is it gave me that win, but it actually taught me that if I worked hard enough at something, because I wasn't the smartest person in the room, I wasn't the most talented person in the room, that I could achieve anything that I truly actually wanted to. And,
did you have a belief there? What you're talking about is something that is of new interest of mine lately, and that's looking at what is deemed, or the public opinion of, natural born talent versus just working hard for things. And I think a lot of people are in one of two camps. You either think I'm born like this, I'm naturally gifted, I have these skill sets, or the opposite, I'm born this way in a detriment. And so therefore, why even try? But I'm kind of hearing you set a goal or goals, got a couple wins, and that was enough to kind of change that perspective. Right?
Yeah, that changed my trajectory for me. And I actually feel bad for a lot of people who never really did something that they really had to work hard for in order to achieve. Because I know later on in life, when it came towards building a business, when it came to bodybuilding, there was never a doubt in my mind that I couldn't. It just was, what is going to be the path in order to get me there?
It's just how.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people who have talent, if they were able to tap into that level of discipline and trust and faith, and it really didn't even come down anyway to discipline, like that was a part of it, but it really, in the long term, came down to a trust and a faith in myself. It came down to, if I work hard enough, if I put in the reps and the sets, then I'll be able to achieve whatever I set my mind to. Not that it's going to be easy, not that I'm not going to, stumble along the way or fall, that I'm going to be the smartest and the most talented person in the room. I actually expect to not be the talented person in the room. I actually expect to be the person who has to bust their ass and work that much harder. So I think for myself, it's really served me later on in life. I'm actually reading a book right now called Mastery by Robert Greene, and he talks a lot about that. He talks a lot about how it really does come down to that trust and faith versus discipline, and people who have that early on in life, how it really does manifest in their success. Because at the end of the day, like hard work is going to beat talent 10 times over again.
I agree. I mean, and it did for you in many ways, and that's kind of the foundation of your story, was getting these initial wins in fitness. And so what happened next? I mean, that kind of became your identity. That became your
massively
thing, right, in a big way.
Yeah, massively became a part of my identity. I got into Baylor Baylor University,
Yeah.
where I decided I wanted to become a registered dietitian just because I was so passionate about athletics and I wanted to really get more into like sports nutrition at that time, just
Makes
kind of
sense.
combining it all together. And it was really around that time where I picked up weightlifting. And this was, to be honest, one of the first things I was freaking badass at. Like everything else, I was like, yeah, like I was kind of mediocre. I had to work really hard, but I had that work ethic, right? Kind of already built into me and that trust and faith. And I started to pick up weightlifting and I was like, I'm freaking badass at this. And I was just crushing it. And
here's my natural talent.
Here is my natural talent combined with an insatiable work ethic and a trust and a belief in myself.
The discipline.
Yes.
Else we were talking about,
But almost to a fault. I can definitely push myself to the extreme sometimes. And I ended up competing back to back for 3 years. I wanted to go pro. I wanted to become
no off season.
Not really.
Not really.
Yeah. If you were to go back and look at my social media, I mean, I maintained probably sub 12% body fat for at least 3 years. Yeah.
Wow.
No menstrual cycle. I mean, I was on birth control at the time too, so I really didn't have a real menstrual cycle anyway, but I was really, really lean and I loved it. And for me, you know, also with my trauma and this story, which was really running the show, and I wasn't aware of it at the time, but of not enough, do more, be more in order to be loved, in order to be worthy. To
get any kind of recognition whatsoever.
Yeah, to get any kind of recognition,
to get attention to you,
to get my own personal validation, even as well. And at the beginning, it started off right as like a super healthy venture. I was able to take this pain and turn it into something beautiful that I couldn't control what was happening around me, but I could control what was happening in here. So it was a super healthy outlet, but I continued to push and push, you know, keeping my body at a very low percent body fat. And it was actually about 3 years into competing. I'm competing now at the national level. I'm first call outs. I'm getting to that point where I'm about to become pro. And I did my last bodybuilding competition, actually took first place at that. And I went home and later that night, just like this massive stomach ache just like came over me. And I remember in that moment, like something just completely shifted. And it was never the same when it came to my health. And I then spent the next year going to all of these different doctors because it wasn't just a stomach ache. You know, like my hair started to fall out. My hormones plummeted. My thyroid plummeted because I did all of this blood work. I went to the endocrinologist. I went to gastroenterologist. I ended up doing CT scan, MRI, colonoscopy, endoscopy.
What didn't you do?
I did. I even went to the Mayo Clinic.
Wow.
I went all the way to the Mayo Clinic because I was very determined to figure out what the frick was going on with me. Like I didn't understand at the time, you know, at that time in my life, I'm thinking like, I am the epitome of health. I am Rachel Scheer, six-pack abs. Yeah. You know, I'm into bodybuilding. I'm a dietitian.
Everything at that point in your life, physically at least, you had control over.
Yes.
So I'm sure, did that play a role into, I am aware of all these variables and I'm controlling them? Was it like, I don't have control over this. What the hell's going on?
Oh yeah, for sure. Lack of control is one of the hardest things for me to definitely overcome. But I had no idea what was going on. And I would look 6 months pregnant at the end of every single day with how bloated my belly was. But the motility in my gut chase literally came to a halt. And the motility in your gut is really like the transit of food through your gastrointestinal tract. And I could no longer even use the restroom. And yes, not so sexy for a fitness model and a bikini competitor. Yeah. So I literally started to have to use enemas just to use the restroom because my body literally like wouldn't even empty anymore.
That had to become your norm.
Yeah, that was my norm. My norm was, you know, take a bunch of laxatives. I was on birth control. I was on thyroid medication. I was on an antidepressant. And then I got put on prescription laxatives. And then at the end of the day, if I still didn't go to the restroom, I then would have to do an enema to try to get my body to even evacuate. It was miserable.
Yeah, I was going to say that sounds miserable.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry to hear that you had to go through that. But what did that land you on?
I actually eventually ended up at a colorectal surgeon because even the Mayo Clinic couldn't even give me an answer. I was just slapped with a label of IBS or irritable bowel syndrome. And I'm like, well, no shit. I have an irritable bowel syndrome. I want to know why.
I told you
I
that.
know it is irritable. That is why I am here. It is very, very irritable. Please help me. You know, and I went to the endocrinologist and everybody was just giving me a Band-Aid. They were addressing the symptoms and no one was really actually helping me get to the root cause. So I was eventually sent to this colorectal surgeon and he then told me the only solution was going to be to have to remove my entire large intestine. Like my entire large intestine. He literally looked at me in the eyes and said, this is something you probably were born with. You've had for most of your life. It's called a floppy colon and you'll probably never regain, you know, the function of your large intestine. So what we can do is we can actually cut your large intestine out. We'll sew the small intestine to the rectum and this will slow down or speed up the motility because it's shortened for your entire intestinal tract. And this will fix the problem. And honestly, Chase, I was so desperate at the time. And
I was going to say, were you considering that?
Yeah.
Like, really?
I was very considering it. I was sitting there in the doctor's office with my boyfriend at the time and my mom, and I was ready to do the surgery. I was just like, hey, when can we schedule it? When can we make this happen? I wanted to get on with my life. And I'm sure people can relate to that too, of just like being in such a place of like desperateness, of like just wanting to be better and like willing to do whatever it takes, not really thinking very, you know, rational. But I also trusted the doctors too, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, at that point, you've gone through so many other personal tactics, so many other specialists. And now you're really at the mercy of this medical professional where a lot of people wind up, you know, I've been there. And when they tell you one thing, you think that's it. And especially just to have your physical capacity and mental capacity so exhausted at that point, I would just imagine you would have been like, yes, just, you know, where do I sign?
Yeah, that's literally what I was thinking. That was rock bottom for me. And I was at the point where I was lying on the kitchen floor every night, afraid to eat, but know that I needed to eat because I was so malnourished. I had just, you know, spent the last 3 years at sub 12% body fat. And I think at this point I'd probably gotten to 8% body fat just because I couldn't eat anything. So I became
not fully by choice at that point.
I became massively malnourished. I mean, I would try to eat, but also like your body's satiety and hunger signals are just so off because you feel that premature fullness. If your body's not emptying, if you're so bloated because of the bacteria is off in your gut, and I'll get to the bacteria portion in a minute.
Plus at that point, I mean, years of that form and extremity, my word, not yours, of dieting. I mean, leptin, ghrelin, hormone levels are just, the scientific term is whacked.
My whole neuroendocrine system was just fucked. My gut microbiome, everything. But no one was really looking at it that way. No one was looking at it from how everything was interconnected and what the stressors were. Because there's really 3 main stressors that lead to dis-ease in the body, not like disease like we think of it as, but as an imbalance in the body. And usually it's some kind of an emotional stress. This can be immediate stress, work stress, poor sleep that is chronic. This can be hidden trauma that's been unaddressed in the body, that just this energy is trapped. And this person is just constantly having their, you know, sympathetic nervous system activated just by itty bitty little things. This can be a dietary stressor. So processed foods that are terrible for your hormones and for your gut that cause inflammation in the body. But even for myself too, like I thought my diet was good then, but to be completely honest, it was macro friendly. Like I was getting enough protein. I was in a calorie deficit, but there were so many different foods that were also terrible for
the quality might have not been the best.
It was terrible for my gut. And there was artificial sweeteners, you know, gums and all of these things in my pre-workouts, my post-workouts. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Walden Farms, but it is
the syrup, the sugar-free, and like the dressings and everything.
Like legit chemicals. There was nothing in that. That was food.
I would see people pour those out. Like they would come to dinner and like, it was that and like their little tray, the little scale to like measure stuff out. I never was that far, but I was like, come on.
But in the bodybuilding world, like you'll do anything because you're also so malnourished and you're like, ooh, a diet food, I can eat as much of this as I want because there's no calories in it. So you get addicted to gum, you get addicted to these pre-workouts, you get addicted to these diet sodas. And although these foods are calorie free, they're terrible for your gut microbiome. They actually feed bad bacteria in the gut. I didn't know that. I didn't put the two together at the time. And then the last stressor is typically more environmental stressors. This can be like you picked up mold, gut pathogens, heavy metals. That can, of course, be a stressor on the body. But for me, like now looking back, it actually makes sense as to why all of these things happened. But all of these physicians were just looking at it like individual like organs and looking at it based off of symptom clusters,
Treating
right?
this symptom at a time instead of the whole person.
And that's a lot of what Western medicine does. And I'm not against Western medicine. Like if you get in a terrible accident, like please go to them, like never go to someone like me. But Western medicine, we do diagnose based off of symptom clusters. So someone goes in and they have depression. They say, hey, you have depression. Here's the medication. You have anxiety. You go in and they give you a label of anxiety. Here's the medication. The same thing with gut issues. You know, they'll rule out anything really major, but then they'll say you have IBS or an irritable bowel syndrome. And it's just like a really, really terrible system.
Why?
But why?
But why though? Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, we can go deep, definitely on that. But we have a food system that pays no attention to health. And we have a health system that pays no attention to food. And then this insurance-based model, right? We only get X amount of time with the doctors and we only get to run very basic level type testing. And no one's really looking at things like your stress, your trauma. We're not looking at like your diet or anything like that. And it's not the physician's fault. Like I'm not here to point the finger or blame them. They're doing what they were taught. I think it's up to us to educate more people when to go to who for what. Because if you think about it, they practice medicine. So they're going to always prescribe medicine. So we can't be surprised when they offer a pill or something like that. But it is knowing what approach to really turn to. So
where did you turn? Who did you go to?
Yeah.
Let's go back to the story. Inquiring minds want to know what happened there.
Yes. So I'm sitting there in the doctor's office and like, honestly, I'm like ready to give up, but something did come over me and you could say it was God. You could say it was my gut, despite how messed up it was. But
your gut's like final hair like, hey, pay attention to one thing, you know?
Yeah. And it was like, this is not the solution. There is something more. And I left. And I literally spent now the next year, just like I was obsessed with getting into Baylor, with studies, with academics, with bodybuilding. I literally became obsessed with learning everything that I could about the gut and the gut microbiome and how these little microbes in our gut control everything from our hormones to our metabolism, to our thyroid, to our mental health, to literally everything, the motility of food throughout our entire body. Immune system, everything. And I'm like, why the heck is nobody talking about this? I just spent the last year going to all of these different physicians and doctors, spending God knows how much money.
Did y'all know about this shit? Because I did.
Yeah.
Like, what's going on here?
Like seriously. Yeah. And since I was a dietitian, and at the time I actually did have some of my own clients that I was coaching more on like the fitness side and the nutrition side, I actually was getting to work with a lab company. And this lab company was a functional medicine lab company. And they actually offered gut microbiome testing. And I decided
Did you know what functional medicine was at that time?
Not really.
Okay. Because you mentioned that. I'm wondering if this was kind of like your introduction to it, your level of awareness with it.
It was my introduction to it. I was getting into it. I didn't really have a name for it really at the time,
Gotcha.
But I started to really dig a bit deeper in terms of the role that these different stressors play a role in our gut and how our gut is connected to all of these different systems. And I just started to put a lot of these different puzzle pieces together. And it was really then where I learned like the power of the microbiome and how this disease began in my body that I was able to really begin to heal. So now looking back, I had a lot of emotional stressors there, right? Like I had that history of trauma. And that was manifesting in this hyperachievement, putting more physical stress on my body, getting myself to a really low % body fat. And when we're in this very stressed state, our cortisol rises. And cortisol is very catabolic. Bodybuilders will do whatever they can to minimize cortisol because it breaks down muscle tissue. But we don't really think about how our gut lining is also a muscle tissue too. And it's actually only one cell layer thick. So when our cortisol is chronically elevated, it actually begins to break down that gut lining, leading to something called intestinal permeability. And
leaky gut.
Yep, leaky gut, otherwise known as. And now we start to get bacteria, foods, and toxins leaking into our bloodstream. We get immune dysregulation. Some people actually develop autoimmune issues because an autoimmune issue, Hashimoto's, lupus, things like that at the core really are a gut issue because that's where most of our immune system is at. But also too, our immune system has lowered. And let's combine that with some other stressors too, right? Poor diet, pre-workouts, post-workouts, artificial sweeteners. And if you think about most of the standard American diet, that's full of sugar, vegetable oils, inflammatory foods that feed bad bacteria, combined with all of these different stressors, it now starts to make sense. Okay, so our immune system is lowered. We have this intestinal permeability that's leading to, all of these food sensitivities. Food sensitivities at the core are really a gut issue. We were not born with food sensitivities. Food allergies are very, very different, but food sensitivities are usually a gut microbiome or a leaky gut issue that we develop. So now I have all these food sensitivities, but this bacteria also controls the motility of everything throughout our gastrointestinal tract. We have something called our body's migrating motor complex. These are cleaning waves that actually sweep food, bacteria, and toxins to the lower part of the GI tract. And when we have gut dysbiosis, which is really an imbalance of that good and the bad bacteria, that migrating motor complex actually comes to a halt, along with this bacteria that is fermenting on so much of the foods that we're eating, producing gas, leading to the bloating that we're experiencing. And the gas that the bacteria produce can actually be very constipating. So if they're methane producing type bacteria, it actually will further slow that motility down, leading to further inflammation. If it's very hydrogen producing, for a lot of people, this can actually lead to things like diarrhea quite a bit too. And I actually had a guy come on my podcast, Scheer Madness, and he was a physician. His name is Dr. Kenneth Brown. And he was actually one of the first physicians to really get into the research of SIBO, which is small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, as well as leaky gut. And he actually talked on my podcast quite a bit about how when we develop intestinal permeability, we also get a breach in our blood-brain barrier.
It makes total sense. Yeah.
Because of our gut and our brain are so interconnected. So now not only are we getting these food, bacteria, and toxins into our bloodstream, we're literally getting them to go into our brain. So now we think about these mental health issues, anxiety, depression, neuroinflammation, Alzheimer's, dementia, all of that can really go back to the gut, especially if we have intestinal permeability. One of the main symptoms that women and men experience with intestinal permeability is typically brain fog, and that's because of that gut-brain connection.
Go figure.
Yeah. So it starts to really make sense. And then on top of that, from a neuroendocrine standpoint too, the hormones have plummeted because of the stress. The thyroid has downregulated, and then gut is just adding to everything. So it always comes back to these stressors: a dietary stressor, an emotional stressor, or sometimes a physical stressor or an environmental stressor. So part of what functional medicine does is it identifies what the stressors are. Now, a physician really doesn't have a whole lot of time to really dig that deep with you. Like, it's a lot of work. And it's also not just the practitioner's job to do all the dirty work for you. It also takes the patient, the client, to also be willing to address things like their trauma. The whole person must heal for the gut to function optimally. So one of the first things I actually started to do was, clean up my diet. I had to address some of the immediate stressors too, like training so much, try to put on a little bit of weight there, but I had to pull out from my diet what I thought was relatively healthy. I had to pull out pre-workouts and post-workouts, artificial sweeteners. I even pulled out things like stevia and monk fruit, which I consider to be pretty gut friendly, but I just was trying trying to be like really, really careful at the time. Gums, things like xanthan gum and guar gum, which are found in a lot of those pre-workouts, nut milks. It's an emulsifier, so fermentable to gut bacteria in the gut. And I had to pull out even vegetables that we would think are good for the gut too, because of how off my gut was. So I couldn't even tolerate things like broccoli, asparagus, cauliflower, garlic and onion, avocado, great healthy foods.
Yeah.
But a lot of these foods are very fermentable to gut bacteria.
Going through something like that. She's for the last like 3 weeks been on a FODMAP diet, kind of going through some gut issues, and not to put her health on blast, but she's been very public about it. And it's interesting. All these things, you bring up such a good point that, especially at the competitive level and someone who takes their health and fitness very seriously, these are good. This word good is applied to what we can and cannot do, or what we choose to allow ourselves to do or not allow ourselves to do. And that's got to be pretty shattering.
Yeah.
Of like, this is good for me, but not good for me.
Yeah. And it's really looking at, everybody from an individual standpoint, and what's going to be best for their body. Now, I do think there are like foods that are just bad, like everybody shouldn't eat. So for example, like vegetable oils, industrial seed oils, don't eat that at any point in your life. Those are never going to be good for you. But things like these FODMAPs, like those fermentable types of carbohydrates, when you have a lot of bacteria overgrowth in your gut, like I had, and I found out through testing my poop through a gut microbiome test, I couldn't tolerate those foods because those foods were fermentable, meaning they were feeding the bacteria in my gut, leading to an increase of bloating, slowing down the motility in my gut. But once I was able to heal my gut and eradicate a lot of the bacteria overgrowth, remove the stressors, add in things to also help heal my gut lining, I was then able to tolerate all of these foods. So now I can eat things like broccoli, asparagus, cauliflower.
Just like a temporary kind of halt on those things.
I can eat those now with no problem. And it's the same thing, when we have intestinal permeability, because we create a lot of these food sensitivities because of our gut lining being broken down. So you may become sensitive to things like chicken. You may become sensitive to things like avocado, like foods that are really good for you. So that's why it's always going back to the gut, removing the stressors, identifying what those are. And then our body's incredible. Our body has an innate ability to really heal once we can get out of our own way and remove those stressors. If we get out of the way,
the body is constantly in pursuit of homeostasis. All it wants to do is just thrive.
Yes. So once I was able to identify those stressors, first for me was really the diet piece of it too, removing some of the immediate physical stressors, like with training really, really hard. I then started to feel a little bit better, but the real work really began for me with addressing the trauma. And addressing that story. I was wondering
when we were going to get there, because everything you've been saying has been so helpful and insightful. And I can even relate to parts of your story, and I know the listener can as well. But that is, in my opinion, kind of like the obvious stuff, or the things that we traditionally start addressing first, and or with a medical provider, a dietitian, a coach, whatever. And that's, hey, let's look at what's going on internally. Let's maybe do some elimination, bring some things back in slowly. But what is going on in the head and the heart?
Yes.
What had happened in the head and the heart? So how did you address those? And how did you go about addressing them in kind of the way you were looking at nutrition? Was it like the same? Was it different? I mean, because it's like, you can't do an emotional elimination diet, or can you? What does that even look like?
Yeah. It really required for me to get brutally honest with myself when it came to healing. And some of the things I did with my diet and the physical stressors, those were like the immediate wins that I could do. And it gave me a little bit of momentum to like feel a bit better. But the healing, like this has been like years and years with this part of the journey really for me. So it really started with me being radically honest. And when I was at like the peak of my bodybuilding career and being a fitness model, like I knew like I had shit that happened in my childhood, but I didn't really like put the connection together between the two. I was like, this happened. This is really, really shitty. And it was what it was. But I didn't really realize how that was creating my current stories. My current stories that were running the show, because we all have these stories that we've been allowing to dictate how we show up in the world, how we think, how we feel, because this story really does create our thoughts, creates our feelings, and our feelings ultimately create our habits and then create our life. So I think it really does start with paying attention to the fruits in our life. So for me, the fruits in my life were burnout, were exhaustion, were health issues, were gut issues, were hormonal imbalances. So I needed to then really reverse engineer it. So reverse engineer it to, what are my habits that are causing this? Okay, what are then the feelings? And it was coming from a place of anxiety, coming from a place of lack. And then really trying to get clear on what the story was for me. And a lot of my story was, if you push hard enough, if you get to this perfect body, then you will be worthy enough. And then you will be loved. And then, you will get the love you never got from your parents when you were a kid. And then you'll be worthy enough even for yourself. But we know that's a vicious cycle that's never ending. And we never really reach there. But I think once we can identify what the story is, we then get to sit back and ask ourselves a very, very powerful question. And that question is this true? Is this true? And that can be really hard.
Do I deem it to be true?
Yes. Do I deem this to be true? And for a lot of people, even thinking about their own story that's been running the show, especially looking at their fruits of their life, for so many people ending in, divorce, a poor relationship, their health suffering, addiction when it comes to drug, alcohol, porn, whatever it may be, it is really, really hard to look at yourself in the mirror and then be like, no, this is a false story. It is really, really hard to do.
Even like with healthy habits, like again, my words, not yours, someone who maybe has been in your shoes of, I've been doing all the right things. I've been in pursuit of an optimal body, optimal nutrition, optimal physique, all of these things. How can pursuit of the quote right things or things that are good for me make me feel this kind of way? How can I have anything other than a negative association or negative identity or positive identity to that, when in reality, these things in extremity, it's just a matter of time before it kind of comes back and bites us in the ass.
Yeah. And I think it's not good or bad, right? Like fitness is still a big part of my life. But it was the fruits of it, right? And for one person, it may be incredibly healthy, but it's always tied back to what that story is and what that feeling really is ultimately. And if the fruits are rotten, then it's not good for you. For one person, I actually had a girl named Brooke Hemingway on my podcast here yesterday. And like for her, she was like a mama of 6 and she was so unhappy, but she had the perfect life, right? She was living in Orange County, California. Her husband was an ER physician. They have beautiful children and she wasn't happy. So her fruits for her were anxiety and depression, where another woman may actually have that exact life and be so fulfilled. And the fruits of her life could be like gratefulness and gratitude and thriving, because her whole dream was just to be a stay-at-home mom.
The sum does not equal the parts.
Yeah. So it's just paying attention to your own fruits ultimately in your life. But then once we know that story, asking ourselves, is this true? And it's not true. For everybody who's listening, it is 100% not true. We've come to believe that story, but then we get to choose what the truth is that we want to be true.
There's the truth, and we view that as the story that we've been living and the story that we've been telling ourselves up to that moment of realization, that aspect, that initial little glimpse of awareness. And then there's the truth that we decide after that.
Yeah, it's the truth that we choose to be true.
So what did you choose?
The truth was, I am freaking more than worthy and I'm capable and I have proven it to myself over and over again. But part of it was, we can say that to ourselves, but our brain is always going to look for evidence for that to be true. So once we decide what the story is, we really do have to prove it to ourselves with the small wins, because this is where I think affirmations are great. I'm all for them. But if you are doing all of the things to affirm your old story, you're still turning towards the vices. I'm not saying you have to be perfect by any means, but if you're still doing all of those things to quote unquote affirm that old story, to really sabotage and prove that to be true, it's going to be really, really hard to believe that new story. So this is where we get to start stacking wins. And this part of the journey can be incredibly empowering. It's incredibly difficult too, because we stumble, we fall, we mess up, we get back up, we do it over and over and over again. And this is where, for me, leaning back into fitness, but in a different way, because I can stack a win immediately, at the beginning of my day by getting in a good workout. And that proves it to myself that I can achieve something. And that's always been part of the story. So I was able to change a little bit of that story from a positive outlook. But we get to stack these different wins ultimately. And it's not always easy. One of my affirmations I use is always act in spite of thoughts, feelings, moods, and emotions, because we're not going to always want to feel like doing everything, not always wanting to wake up at a certain time. We're not always wanting to do the things that we know are ultimately good for ourselves. Sometimes we just want to get, Whataburger, eat, bonbons and things like that. Like that's what we want to do.
True.
But but it's choosing to do what is going to be the most loving thing for us and what's going to really affirm that story and what we want to believe to be true. And as soon as you do that, you get a little win and you're like, okay, I can kind of do this. And then you do it again. And you know what? You kind of mess up a little bit. And then you give yourself grace. Mm-hmm. But then you have to go back through the whole process and you say, okay, what is the story? Because this is where we can very easily fall into guilt or shame. Guilt is totally fine. It means I did something that wasn't in alignment with myself and what my core values are. Shame is I am bad. So we get to go through this again. What is the story? Is this true? No, this is not true. What do I want to be true? What am I going to do to prove this? And then we get ourselves back on top. And we do this over and over again until we truly actually believe that. We believe that story is the truth, because it's not a story anymore. It is literally the truth. And really, for me, that's where a lot of the healing really did take place. Now, there are some other things that definitely helped me. This is where I got into meditation. I got into a lot of journaling my thoughts, putting it on paper. I actually would go through this entire process in my journal of like, what is the story? Is this true? Where did this story come from? What do I want the story to be true? And then what are some of the action items that I was going to do? Kind
of needing to become a detective of your own life.
Yeah, literally becoming a detective for your own life. And now you can work with a coach who can kind of help guide you. Sure. But that's what I mean by like, it really comes down to us to be our own advocate for our own healing. And I think once we're able to get to a certain place of our healing, then the next step is really to serve other people. Mm-hmm. Because we can heal, but where healing really comes full circle is when we take what we've walked through, we've taken what we've been able to overcome, and we're now able to help other people do the exact same. So now I've literally made, a multiple 7-figure business out of helping people heal their gut issues, their autoimmune issues, also lose weight, reach their goal body as well too.
Which continues to serve you as well.
Yeah, I'm still passionate about that. Like I'm so passionate still about like weightlifting, and I still want to look good naked. I still want to have a 6-pack. I still want all of that. And I'm a big believer that you can have it all. You can have it all. And I think right now there's actually a big gap between the fitness industry and between the functional community, the wellness community. The fitness world says just eat less, work out more, just weight train, get enough protein. Well, heck, when I did that, guess what happened? I ended up with all of these gut issues, these hormone issues, because I was eating all of these foods that were terrible for my gut, and I was pushing my body to an extreme. And then I also know people who really also get more on the wellness side. Hey, let's focus on intuitive eating. Let's be more cognizant of our relationship with food. Awesome. Let's work on our gut health. All of those things are amazing. But then they're like, why aren't I losing weight? Yeah. Why aren't I building muscle? I also want that too. So I'm really on a mission right now to bridge the gap between these two worlds, because we really can have it all. And we should be able to have it all, but it is up to us to really be the advocate that it is possible, but I think also to know who to go to, what for specifically.
Exactly. You make me think about something that I have gone through, and I'm curious if you have too. When we get to a point in our self-discovery of what's working, what's not, and understanding the truth that we have been living and the truth we are now choosing to live and choosing to write, our world changes. Mm-hmm. And when that happens, we look at the rest of the world through new eyes.
Truth.
And sometimes other people look at us differently because there's a palatable, noticeable, obvious shift in how we show up in the world, how we talk, how we carry ourselves, what we just begin to share publicly, what's important, what I'm going through, my struggles, my successes. Did that happen for you? And how, when your world changed, did the world change for you?
That's such a great question, and so relative to even everything that's happening in my life right now, because I feel like I'm at a point in my life right now where I am freaking thriving. Like I truly do. Like I've been in like so grateful. Like I'm thriving in my relationship. I'm thriving in my business. I'm thriving in my health. I'm thriving in all of these different areas. And even my boyfriend, Aaron, he just sees me. I'm just like a little fairy floating around all day, like playing and just like doing things and just like loving life. Thriving, just like thriving. And with that, I show up so much more authentic in who I am. Like I'm actually a really big weirdo at heart. I have like a really weird sense of humor that will come out from time to time. That's slightly cocky, even a little bit too, but from a very, very loving place. Yeah. Cocky confidence, a little bit of both, but from a humor standpoint. And I start to really lean into my own authenticity, but I also really want to see other people win too. And like even this morning, I just felt like just like this energy, and I wanted to reach out to the people in my life and encourage them and like speak so much good into them and see them really, really win. And I think that's like the lens that has really shifted for me, because I know for myself, like when I was in that place of lack and not enough and striving and driving and had all of that going on, I was so self-focused and I would shrink and I would close myself off. Go,
literally living in your own world, creating your own world. Sometimes, we got to do that. But, when we do that long enough, what are we doing? Yeah. Living in our own world.
Yeah. And it was always like a competition with other people, like other people's success would then bring down my own success. And now like, I don't think that way. I don't feel that way. I do not believe that in my heart, but that's kind of where I was at then, because I was just hustling for my worthiness at that point in my life. So I'd say like the way I show up in the world and the way I view other people has changed exponentially. And now I just like really want to like pay it forward. And I think that's where that like service parts come in, because it's like, you guys, I feel so good. Like I want other people to feel this way too.
We all can feel this way.
Yes.
We all can feel great. And most people, I think, don't know how good feels.
They do not. Yeah. And I work with so many people, like they just get so used to, the anxiety, the depression, the inflammation that's running throughout their body. And as soon as they start to feel good, and then they kind of go back to maybe how they were even eating before, they were like, oh my God, I don't want to do this.
You're turned off.
They're like, they actually say to me, I think my body has become more sensitive to these foods now that I cut them out. And I go, now, did they become more sensitive? Or did you actually just realize what it feels like to feel good? And then when you went back to that, you realized how shitty you actually did feel before.
For the first time ever, maybe you're actually listening to your body, or you even know what your body is telling you. Our body is signaling stuff to us all the time. It's just, do we know how to listen? Do we know how to interpret that information? And then are we going to do anything with it? And what are we going to do about it? It's a process, It's a process.
Yeah. I feel so in tune with my body now. I know when anything is off. I also know when my thoughts, my heart, and my actions are off too. And we know that too. We know when we're not living in an alignment. We know when, we're at the home at the end of the day and we're washing the dishes and we're like really, really angry at our partner for like having to do this work. So our thoughts are focused on resentment and we're giving off this energy really about this other person that is very, very negative, but we're doing an action that is very, very helpful. And like women, like we sense that like so much too. Like if that's like our husband or our person doing that. So I feel so in tuned. So like my daily mission is really like this inner battle. And I actually like to play a little bit of a game with it every single day. Like whenever I do get triggered, because I think part of this too is we think we get to a point of healing where we never get triggered. I'm not sure if that really ever happens, because I think part of it though is just learning to dance a bit more with our trauma and our pain, and what felt like it was so heavy before, it just kind of feels a little bit lighter. Like we kind of notice it. We notice the story come up, but then we're like, hey, You know, like
so true.
This isn't true. I know exactly where
Yeah.
this is coming from. And it feels a lot lighter. We're able to kind of brush it off and then choose what the truth is. So I don't think like that ever really fully goes away. Maybe it does fully. I haven't gotten to that point quite
I haven't
yet
gotten there either.
on my healing journey. If somebody has, I'm totally would be open to learning about what that would look like. But I think it is really, you know, this dance. So every time I do get triggered now, because we are going to, and our partners will be the number one person who will trigger us the most. And I think in those scenarios, I like to look at it like, okay, how can I come out on top on this? Not with the other person, but like with myself, because with
Good
me
catch.
against the
Yeah.
trigger,
Yeah.
me against the trigger, me against myself, because my old self-gravity, my OSG would want to respond this way, would want to fight, would want to retreat, would want to shrink, would want to close off, would want to punish. Women want to punish very often too. But I get to choose how I want to respond. I get to choose the truth. And then when I really act on that and I create a little bit of a distance from the trigger first, and then I show up the way I want to, like I feel like $1 million. And guess what I did there? I proved it to myself with another win. And those wins we get to remember over and over again. So then the next time it happens, we know, we trust, we have that trust and that faith that we'll be able to get through it.
Your story is beautiful. And it's just, it never ceases to amaze me when I sit down with somebody here on the show of there's the obvious stuff, right? I think maybe just personally speaking, I'm like 17 years into my wellness journey. They're just obvious things that if we do more of these, less of those, majority of people are going to feel better, look better, think better, so on and so forth. But no matter what those obvious things are, there's one constant, and that is every person is different. And your story and everything that led you to the obvious things that you did or didn't do is the most unique thing in the world. And that is always going to be the most important thing in your continued journey, because you're the only one that has that background. I'm the only one that has my background. And I'm the only one that has these unique triggers and relations and experiences just like you are. So we might go about the same or similar process, but the experience is going to be dramatically different. Dramatically different. Well, I do need to wrap up, unfortunately. I would love to just sit with you so much longer, but I want to bring it home to the theme here. And I think kind of where we are in your story is a perfect segue. Once we become aware of these things and we choose to write our truth for the first time in a long time, that's kind of, I'm taking that as living a life ever forward. But when you hear those two words, what does that mean to you? How do you live a life ever forward?
I think part of that is taking what we've walked through, taking the pain, getting really brutally honest with ourselves, and then living in our authentic truth, not the story that's been running the show, not the one that society, our parents, the trauma has decided for us, but the truth that we truly believe that is the truth, how we want to live our life, how we want to create our life, and living that so freaking authentically. Like living our truth is in every encounter. It's not shrinking ourselves. It's not, putting ourselves up and creating this like guard and like trying to attack somebody. It is being so confident in who you are, the weirdness, the pain, the trauma, and knowing that that makes you so unique and so beautiful, and that you don't need to compete with anybody else, because your authentic truth is bringing something so beautiful to the world that nobody else can, because of what you've walked through, because of the gifts that God has given you, and really being able to live in that, you're able to give it to the world. So living that purpose, that is really the purpose, and I think the mission that we're all on, and how we can live ever forward.
I love it. I always say there's never a right or wrong answer. I appreciate every interpretation. So thank you so much for that. Well, Rachel, we're going to have all of your information down in the show notes for everybody, the video notes, but where can they go to learn about you, connect with you, see what you got going on in the world the most?
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram. It's at Rachel Scheer. And my practice is at Rachel Scheer Nutrition. I have a team of 5 registered dietitians, but actually I'm about to launch this week my gut health.
As this is live. Yep.
Launched right now, my gut health repair program, which is actually going to be doing everything that I talked about in this podcast. It's really bridging the gap between the fitness world, between the functional world. So I'm literally going to walk you through everything between how to count your macros, how to get in enough protein, giving you a 12-week fitness program, but also how to heal your gut, how to listen to your body, how to be more intuitive with the foods that you are eating, and then really helping you become your own person who really understands your entire body. So it's literally an incomplete brain dump of everything that I do with my clients for a fraction of the price. It's in a group-based setting, but I'm just so passionate about this right now. And if you use the code CHASE, you can actually get 10% off.
Woo woo, like that. CHASE, baby. Well, again, thank you so much. And thank you for that offer from my audience. Again, we'll have all that linked for everybody down in the show notes. But Rachel, this was a pleasure. This was sheer madness. This was sheer perfection. Sheer perfection. There we go.
That's my podcast name. My podcast is Sheer Madness. So you can actually go check that out as well. And it's been a pleasure, Chase. I've been honored to come on your podcast.